Community members and officials celebrated a display of multiculturalism today. Husson University hosted the 22nd Annual Maine Chinese Conference held by Bangor Chinese School and the Chinese Language and Culture Center of Maine. With this year's theme of language, education, and cross-cultural collaborations, panels explored the ways the U.S. and China could work together to strengthen both countries. This included discussions of the ways Chinese culture could be introduced and explored in classrooms, along with personal accounts of students who were able to visit China in an exchange program. Now, not only that, but students of the Bangor Chinese School showed off their talents in unique performances, followed by a lunch of traditional Chinese foods. For organizers and attendees alike, they say communication is the key to success, and local celebrations of multiculturalism only promotes that on a global scale.
I think, the most important thing is to understand each other. The language is as a bridge to bring all ethnic groups together.
China as a country, United States as a country, they look like have more powerful to work together. And meanwhile, there's something misunderstanding around, so we want to try to, fill that gap.
For more information of the Bangor Chinese School and the Chinese Language and Culture Center of Maine, visit bangorchinese.com.